Hello readers, thank you for joining me for another book recommendation. I started this channel with a loose list of my favorite books and a rough order in which I wanted to talk about them. Part of the reason uploads are so stilted here is because I want to take the time to reread them all before I make these videos about them. But I also knew that I wanted to leave room for some surprise entries, any new books I read that impress me enough that I want to talk about them. So here we are. I'll probably make a little rundown video on this at the end of the year, but I'm participating in a reading challenge this year where you have to find books that fulfill certain prompts. I was never serious about finishing it because it works out to about one book a week and I work like 3 jobs, but it seemed like a fun way to get some books on my radar that I may never have read otherwise. One of the prompts was a biographical fiction, to be followed up with a non-fiction book about that same historical figure, which is what led me to I Am Cleopatra by Natasha. It wasn't until I had the book in my hands and sat down to read it that it really hit me how little I actually knew about Cleopatra. It was a familiar name, of course, and I knew she was a famous queen of Egypt, but I'm not sure I could have even told you that she was the last queen of Egypt, before the Roman Empire finally succeeded in overpowering and absorbing them. This conflict with Rome colors her entire life, as Natasha tells the story, in a first-person account through Cleopatra's own eyes, of how she grew up watching her father make desperate deals with the Roman senators, holding off their conquest, but only temporarily. He died and she took the throne when she was just 18, but as was tradition, her father had decreed that she would rule alongside one of her brothers. This particular brother is depicted as being cruel, greedy, and selfish without exception, and it quickly becomes apparent that the danger she's in at home rivals anything she has to fear from a foreign army. Cleopatra goes on a journey down the Nile to see her people, visit some temples, and retrieve the next generation's sacred bull, which the ancient Egyptians worshipped as much as any of their monarchs who were viewed as living gods. While she's away, her brother makes a deal with the revered Roman general Julius Caesar in an attempt to stay on the Romans' good side and claim the palace for himself. The bulk of this story follows Cleopatra's journey to sneak back into her kingdom, win over Caesar and save her country, and their complicated relationship up to the point of his death. To talk about just what I enjoyed so much about this book, I want to share some of the author's note at the end. Natasha writes, "We all know Cleopatra, or we think we do. Most of us are familiar with the version of Cleopatra derived from Shakespeare, the aging seductress, caught up in the politics of love. Cleopatra is one of the greatest and most complex female characters Shakespeare ever created. Yet, why did Shakespeare leave Cleopatra out of his play Julius Caesar entirely? She was living in Rome at the time, as Caesar's lover and mother of his son. Shakespeare erases her from his history. I decided that it was time to put her back in and imagine her story from her own point of view." She talks a bit about how most depictions we have of Cleopatra were created using ancient Roman accounts of who she was and all she did, people who maybe had a stake in not painting her in the best light, before continuing, "I wanted to create Cleopatra as a woman with vulnerabilities and real human relationships, but who still feels like a queen from an ancient world. I needed to both bring her to earth like lightning, yet still keep that divine essence which makes her Cleopatra. She's both powerful and fragile, divine and human, a living goddess, but also a mother who worries about her son, a woman who needs to trade her body and sexuality for her country." Honestly, the best praise I can give this book is just to say that the author accomplished absolutely everything she set out to do. Her attempt to bring Cleopatra to life and make her as human as possible has gifted us with such a fantastic character. She is tough and confident and regal enough to be the type of character you want to hold up for young girls to look up to, but simultaneously, of course, she was also a human being with people she loved enough to be weak for at times. Of course she would have been afraid in the face of her own death, even if she never failed to put on a brave face, and of course, mentally and emotionally as well as physically, giving herself to Caesar as a bargaining tool to reclaim a power that should have been rightfully hers to begin with, would have cost her something. There were a lot of great passages where she examined the sacrifices queens and princesses tend to have to make for power. I really felt her indignance during the scene where Caesar throws a banquet in her honor to welcome her back, offering her food from her kingdom in her own palace. But she always holds her head high, and especially because she's already shown that she can be as vulnerable as the rest of us, it's hard not to respect her for it. I think the most surprising thing about this book, though, is that it was pretty compelling as a love story at times, too. I Am Cleopatra is told not quite half, but partially through the perspective of Caesar's lifelong lover, a woman named Servilia, too. And I think Servilia was also a pretty likable character, respectable in her own right, but it was the complicated relationship between Cleopatra and Caesar that I found myself enjoying. Theirs is not a traditional love story by any means. There are several factors that make it problematic. What's most present through Cleopatra's narrative is how they will always come second to each other, even on their best days. Caesar's top priority will always be his ambition, and for Cleopatra, he'll always come second to her country, and then third once their son is born. But considering their connection started purely as a political maneuver, it's kind of impressive enough that the author was able to bring anything to life between them that felt genuine. Cleopatra's brother is furious when Caesar welcomes her in and seems content to play both sides, refusing to endorse one for sole leadership over the other. There's a brief civil war between the siblings that leads to Caesar and Cleopatra being essentially imprisoned within the palace, waiting for the Roman reinforcements to arrive. But being locked up together gives Cleopatra a chance to show off her own tactical skills, and he comes to value her opinion as much as any of his military advisors. It's the kind of strength that only continues to make her seem more impressive when the story's told this way, but I can totally see how it might have been twisted to make her look like this grand, monstrous manipulator when told through the eyes of her enemies. Simply put, I really enjoyed this tale. The paperback copy I got is just over 300 pages, so it's not actually the shortest book out there, but it felt like a really quick read, because it moves at a good pace and it was engaging enough that I didn't want to put it down. This is my shortest video yet, and I'm sure some of that has to do with how I don't have a history with this book like I do with the others. But I definitely needed to write up a little something to do my part to promote this one. As soon as I reached the end, I knew that it had made enough of an impact that it would nag at the back of my mind forever if I didn't. Thank you for watching.